Hi, I'm Charlotte Rees from Unleashed Education, and you've tuned in to another episode of Edit My Photo. Eva was the winner of the October 2022 Edit My Photo Challenge in the Unleashed Education community. As the winner of the challenge, Eva submitted this image of her dog Cooper. The image is beautifully backlit, and I just love Cooper's really expressive pose. In the edit, I'll be correcting the white balance and tones, dealing with the area of blown out highlights in the water, and improving the composition with some reconstructive cropping. Feel free to follow along from start to finish or fast track through the tutorial using the time codes below. As always, I welcome your questions and feedback in the comments. Alright, so here we are in Lightroom. Let's take a look at what we have to work with here. So this has actually got quite good bones, this image, I think. It was deliberately underexposed, I feel, to try and retain some of this detail in the highlights. It has meant that the image is a little bit dark overall, but that's fairly easily fixable. Now it has been shot at ISO 400, which is great. It's a fairly low ISO. It's going to mean that we can push and pull the tones around a little bit, and it's not going to degrade the image quality too much. So let's dive into these sliders and have a bit of a look and see what we're going to do. I think overall it probably needs a bit of extra exposure. We're definitely going to need to take the blacks down because of that gap at the bottom of the histogram there. So let's take the black slider down, and you'll see how that makes the dog look blacker. I feel like the image is a little bit cool overall, so let's take that color temperature up. That's really starting to get some beautiful golden tones in this area here. We don't want it looking too green, so let's take the tint slider up just a little bit as well. Okay, so we've got some pretty full-on highlights in the water here. I don't think this is going to be recoverable. We can find out for sure by taking the exposure all the way down. And if we do that, you can see there's basically no detail in that area there, but there is something we might be able to do in Photoshop later to just make that area look a little bit nicer. So let's just take that exposure back up to where it was. Okay, so if we take the highlights down, that's really going to help bring detail into these lighter areas here. Probably take the shadows up a little, and then maybe the whites up a little. So it's looking a lot nicer now. So what else can we do? We might do some work with masking. So to start with, let's see if we can improve the look of this water here. So let's go with a radial gradient. I'm going to pull that out about here and then just tilt it a little bit to sort of match the tilt of this water. I am going to straighten this image, but I'm not going to do it yet. I'm going to wait and do it in Photoshop. So I think that pretty much encompasses the water. I'm going to subtract the subject, and I'm also going to subtract with a brush this little area here because I don't think it would look right doing the same thing to this bit here that's essentially in the shadow. Okay, now I'm going to turn the overlay off on the keyboard, and I'm just going to add a little bit of haze. I'm going to take the warmth up. Ooh, see how that really brings in those beautiful warm tones? And it might need just a little touch of tint, and then maybe bring the highlights down as well. There we go. I think that's sort of enhanced and improved the look of that water there. I'm also going to add another radial gradient. This one will be just like a basic vignette. So I'm just going to center it on the dog, tilt it a little bit, make it a little bit smaller, and then invert that and take the contrast and the exposure down. So this is helping to bring all your attention towards the middle of the image, which is where we want it to be. Now I feel like the bottom of the image is a little bit eye-catching. I really love having all that foreground blur in there. It gives a real sense of depth to the image, but we can probably darken it off a little bit. So let's just go with a regular linear gradient. Just gonna pull that up from the bottom. Maybe just add it up a little bit there. And again, I'm going to take the contrast and the exposure down a little bit on the bottom there too. Okay, so let's do some work to Cooper. This image has been really nicely focused, so perfect focus on the eye. So I'm going to do a select subject. That's made a pretty good selection. O on the keyboard to turn that overlay off. And I'm just going to try and get a little bit more darkness into the blacks, a bit more contrast maybe as well. So I'm going to pull the blacks down, take the whites up. So that's going to help increase contrast in the dog. So I think that's looking pretty good. Maybe a teeny little bit of extra exposure. Blacks down a little bit more. Let's turn that off and on. See how that's just added some nice contrast to the dog there. Okay, that's probably all I want to do with the masks at the moment. I think this is probably as far as we can take it here in Lightroom. Let's take it over to Photoshop and give it some finishing touches. So I've exported this as a PSD file, and here we are in Photoshop with this image. Now there's a bit of cleaning up we need to do first. So I will be removing this blue council tag. I feel that's a little bit distracting. We might even take off just that little bit of the collar as well. We got a little bit of cleaning up to do on the dog's face. There's this really bright bit of bokeh right next to the dog's face that I think I probably will get rid of. So I'm going to dive in and take care of all that. Okay, so I think that has pretty much cleaned up everything that I wanted to clean up. Let's just take a quick look at the image when I first brought it in, and then with those little fix-ups done. I think that's really simplified the image and helped to remove distractions. So let's take a look at the straightness of this image. I can kind of see the horizon line, so the dominant horizontal line in the background. It's at a bit of a tilt. I also feel like Cooper isn't really centered in the image. So let's grab the crop tool, so C, and I'm just going to press X, and I can see it's on 16:9 aspect ratio. That must have been what I had it on last. So I'm just going to change that to 2:3 because that's the standard kind of aspect ratio. Now I'm just pulling down here to straighten it, and I'm trying to get this horizontal line in the background sort of lined up on the grid so it's nice and straight. Now it can definitely come in a little bit on the right, and I'm going to use content aware to fill that top corner a little bit. I don't want to make it too challenging for it, so I won't go down into the water too much, but I think probably around there is going to be good. Now I don't like to throw away too much of the image. I always like to keep it just in case you need the edges for doing, say, a gallery wrap canvas or cropping it to a certain aspect ratio to put in an album. So while I do want to center him in the final crop, I'm not going to throw away too much of the edges here. So I'll bring that out a little bit there. Okay, so we need to make sure that content aware is ticked before pressing enter or return. And it's going to fill in those edges for me with content aware. Now let's have a look and see how it's done there. That looks pretty good. And then this corner up here looks pretty good too. So it's done a really good job there. Now this area here, I would really like to try and fix that up a bit better. So that's all completely blown out. But what we can do is kind of just fill it with a very, very light color so it's not completely white. So the color that I want to choose is going to be basically right next to the white area. So it's kind of this real light, kind of peachy orange color. So I'm going to change the foreground color to that color, and then I'll go over here to the layers palette. I want to create a solid color layer, so I'm going to click solid color. It's automatically used that foreground color there, so I'm just going to go okay there. Now it's added that color fill layer on top of the image. What we want to do is use the mask that it comes with, which is currently white, which is currently showing all of that layer, and we're going to invert that to black. So Command I on the keyboard to invert that, turn it into a black mask. And now you can't see any of that color there at all. So to bring that color back again, we just need to make sure that mask is selected. Grab a brush, be on the keyboard, make sure it's a white brush, and I'm going to paint with a white brush into that black mask to reveal that color. Okay, so that is the area that I would like to get a little bit more color back into. As you can see, as I've gone over the edges, I definitely don't want to leave it like this because it's sort of created a really fuzzy edge. I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer from normal to multiply, and that's actually going to blend that. Let me just go back in the history. So that's without the blending mode, and that's with the blending mode. I'm also going to change the opacity to something a little bit lower because we don't want it to be too obvious. We just want a little hint of color in there. So let's just take this up to maybe around 30-ish, 40%, something like that. So it basically sort of, it takes it to the same level as this kind of color over here. So unless you look at it too closely or think about it too hard, it's going to look fairly natural. So I'll just flatten that down with a custom keyboard shortcut that I have set up. Now there is a little bit of noise in there. We did pull those shadows back a fair way, so I would like to try and just deal with this noise, especially in the background. It's not too bad in the dog. So I'm going to use Topaz. So first up, I'm going to duplicate that background layer, and this background copy layer is where I'm going to apply Topaz denoise to. So filter, Topaz, denoise. And I'm thinking the best model for this one is probably going to be low light. It's giving me an instant preview here, and I can see immediately that it's ripped all of that noise out of the background. So let's go apply on that. Now, if we zoom in, we can see it's completely obliterated all the noise. Let me turn that layer off and on again. Now, I don't think it looks natural to have no noise in a photo, so I'm going to dial the opacity of that layer back a bit, probably to around 70%. I think that helps to smooth out the noise in the background without removing it completely. Now, that denoise has also done a pretty good job of sharpening up the details in Cooper's face there, to the point where I don't think it actually needs any extra sharpening. So I'm going to just leave it at the denoise. I'll flatten that down again. Now there is one final little thing. I probably should have done this before I did the denoise, but this bit here I find is a little bit distracting. So I'm going to fix that, not by getting rid of the pixels, not by doing any sort of content aware or anything like that, but just by kind of toning that color down a little bit more. So if I go and create another layer, and then I change the brush foreground color to this sort of brownish color that's right next to where it is. Go okay. And then I'm going to just paint with a brush over this area. So again, there's no way we're going to leave it like that. We do need to make it look more natural than that. So we need to change the blending mode. And this time we're going to change it to hue or color. I think color might give us a better result. It's a bit more lacking in contrast. So if we zoom out now, see how that is immediately much less noticeable down there? I think that's pretty good. So the color blending mode only ever really changes the color. It doesn't change the lightness or darkness of the pixels that you're sort of covering up. So sometimes you might need to duplicate that layer and choose a different blending mode. Something like luminosity might work. So luminosity at 100% isn't going to work very well. So let's just take that down a little bit and see how it's just kind of darkened it as well. And I'll just add a mask to this layer and a black brush. So I'll just switch the foreground and background colors here. And I'm just going to come in on the edges a little bit to remove that brown overlay from along the edges. I'll add a mask to this one as well. So I feel that that's definitely blended that away a little bit more. What we can probably do though is do a little bit of clone stamping up the top here around the pore, because I think it's because it's it's intersecting right near the pore that it's quite so noticeable. Yeah, okay, I think that's pretty much done the trick. Now, unless you knew that was there before, I don't think that would be overly eye-catching anymore. Now, this little section over here, it's also a bit eye-catching, but I think we can use a pretty similar method to get rid of this. So, I mean, we could try and content aware it away. It doesn't do too bad of a job. I'll just go back in the history there and then deselect that. So another thing that you can use, it's also sort of uses blending modes, is you can use the clone stamp tool, and instead of clone stamping pixels, you can clone stamp a color. So if you just change the blending mode of the clone stamp tool to color, we can sample from right next to that and just kind of go over it with that color. You often need to put all that all the way up to 100%. We might even go with hue. Hue might work better there. Yeah, that's not bad. So what we're doing is basically just clone stamping the color over the top and making it not as bright. I think that's turned out nicely. So I think I'm actually pretty much finished here in Photoshop. So I'm going to save this and then I'll meet you back in Lightroom for the final crop and the finishing touches. Okay, here we go. We've got our final edited image here that we've brought back in from Photoshop. So let's have a look at the crop. I'm actually just going to bring this in a little bit, make the subject nice and centered. That'll work nicely. Now, because I've cropped it in a little bit, it's sort of lost some of that original vignetting that I added. So I'm going to add a custom vignette here again. I'll just go to the radial gradient, pull it out, centering it on the dog, invert it, and then just take that exposure and the contrast down a little bit. So that just adds a nice subtle vignette around the dog, which I think is quite nice. Probably even bring it up a little bit more. So there we go. That was a pretty simple edit, couple of little tricky things in Photoshop, but basically pretty straightforward. It's a really gorgeous image and it was heaps of fun to play with. So thank you so much for donating it, Eva. That's it for me for now, so I'll catch you next time.